The sheriff told me to step away from my own cabin before sunrise, and that was the exact moment the Willow Ridge HOA destroyed itself. I still remember the sound the lake made that morning. Slow waves rolling against old cedar dock posts while fog drifted across the water thick enough to hide the opposite shoreline. The air smelled like wet pine, outboard motor fuel, and cold lake water. It should have been peaceful. Instead, red and blue patrol lights flashed across my cabin windows while two sheriff deputies stood beside my front porch like they were guarding a crime scene. My truck tires crunched over gravel as I pulled up just after 6:10 a.m., coffee still hot in the cup holder beside me. The second I saw the new lock hanging from my front door, I already knew exactly who was behind it. Patricia Holloway stood near the dock wearing white pants, tan riding boots, and a cream-colored blazer that looked ridiculous standing in mud beside a fishing cabin older than she was. She held a clipboard against her chest like it was some kind of royal scepter, while her white Range Rover sat parked beside my boat trailer. The woman treated every HOA meeting like a political campaign photo shoot. Even at sunrise beside a lake, her hair looked professionally styled. One of the deputies raised a hand before I even stepped fully out of my truck. "Sir, I need you to remain near the driveway until ownership verification is completed." Ownership verification. On my own cabin. I stared past him toward the porch where a bright orange notice flapped in the morning breeze beside the door. Property seizure pending HOA compliance review. I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, because it takes a special kind of suburban arrogance to illegally seize a lakeside cabin sitting on land your HOA technically does not even control. Patricia took my laugh personally immediately. "Mr. Whitaker," she said sharply, "you were notified multiple times regarding structural violations and unauthorized occupancy concerns." Unauthorized occupancy. I had owned that cabin longer than Patricia had lived in the county. My father bought the shoreline property in 1974 when Willow Ridge was nothing but undeveloped timberland and fishing docks. Back then, nobody wanted lake property because the roads flooded every spring and cell service barely existed. But my father loved quiet places. Said lakes tell the truth about people because silence makes fake personalities uncomfortable. He built that cabin by hand with two friends and a borrowed flatbed truck. Every pine board still carried the smell of old cedar and engine grease from the workshop where he cut them himself. After my wife passed 3 years ago, the cabin became the only place quiet enough for me to think clearly again. I came there to fish at sunrise, fix old boat motors, and sit on the dock listening to water move against the shoreline while the world stayed still for a few hours. Patricia hated that cabin from the day she first saw it. According to her, it damaged the luxury aesthetic of Willow Ridge Lake Estates. Never mind the fact that half the neighborhood existed because of the shoreline tax incentives I personally helped establish 15 years earlier. Patricia saw an old cabin between million-dollar homes and assumed the owner had no power. Big mistake. The younger deputy shifted uncomfortably beside the porch while Patricia flipped through paperwork dramatically. The HOA board voted unanimously to restrict access until property compliance matters are resolved. She announced loudly enough for nearby neighbors standing on balconies to hear. Ah yes, audience mode. Patricia loved humiliating people publicly, especially anyone she considered beneath the neighborhood image she spent years trying to manufacture. She once fined a retired veteran because his fishing boat cover looked visually inconsistent with lakefront standards. Another resident received violation letters over wind chimes. Wind chimes. That was the level of suburban dictatorship we were dealing with. I walked slowly toward the dock instead of arguing. The lake water reflected pale gray morning light, while boat ropes knocked softly against wooden posts nearby. Behind Patricia, expensive lakefront mansions stretched along the shoreline with giant windows and decorative stone patios built almost directly on top of county setback limits. Funny thing about wealthy neighborhoods. People assume money changes property law. It does not. The older deputy finally cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, the HOA claims the structure may sit outside current shoreline compliance boundaries." I looked directly at him. Did they also mention who approved those shoreline boundaries? Patricia's expression tightened slightly for the first time. Tiny crack. Barely noticeable. But it was there. She still thought this situation was simple. "Old man. Small cabin. Push hard enough, and he leaves quietly." What Patricia did not know was that every shoreline agreement protecting her luxury subdivision from massive county tax increases carried my signature. I spent 18 years serving on the County Land and Shoreline Commission before stepping away from public office. The reduced tax rates keeping Willow Ridge affordable for wealthy homeowners? My program. The protected recreational shoreline zoning preserving their property values? Also mine. Even the dock expansion permits half the neighborhood relied on passed through my office years earlier. And standing there beside my own cabin while morning fog rolled across the lake and sheriff deputies waited for instructions from a woman holding fake authority on borrowed land, I realized Patricia Holloway had just made the most expensive mistake of her entire life. The younger deputy avoided eye contact after I asked who approved the shoreline boundaries. That told me everything I needed to know. He had been handed paperwork, told a story, and sent out before sunrise to help a homeowners association intimidate an old man out of his own cabin. It happens more often than people think. Most folks hear the words HOA compliance violation and assume somebody official must know what they are talking about. Patricia Holloway depended on that assumption like oxygen. Morning fog still drifted low across the lake while the sound of distant boat motors echoed softly through the water. Somewhere farther down the shoreline, somebody was already fishing before work, probably unaware that a suburban civil war had just started 3 docks over. I stepped onto the gravel path leading toward my porch and noticed fresh tire tracks cutting across the damp ground beside the cabin. Contractors. Patricia had not just changed the lock. She brought people onto my property while I was gone. The thought tightened something cold in my chest. Not anger exactly. Worse, disrespect. My father spent 2 summers building that cabin with his own hands after returning from long-haul trucking routes through Arkansas and Missouri. Every beam carried stories. Every floorboard creaked in familiar places. I learned to tie fishing knots sitting on that porch while my father cleaned bass beside an old metal cooler that still sat near the dock today. After my wife Eleanor died from cancer, that cabin became the only place where silence did not feel empty. The smell of cedarwood, lake water, and old coffee grounds somehow kept memories alive without hurting so much. Patricia looked at it and saw decreased luxury appeal. That alone told me everything about the kind of person she was. She stepped closer while flipping through papers on her clipboard dramatically. The HOA has documented multiple concerns regarding visual deterioration and unauthorized dock maintenance. She announced loudly enough for nearby homeowners to overhear from their balconies. There it was again. Audience voice. Patricia never missed an opportunity to perform authority in public. The woman treated neighborhood politics like a courtroom drama nobody asked to attend. I looked past her toward the neighboring properties lining the shoreline. Giant lake houses with heated infinity pools, outdoor kitchens, and glass walls reflecting the morning light off the water. 15 years ago, none of that existed. Back then, Willow Ridge County struggled financially after the lumber mills shut down. Most shoreline properties sat undeveloped because taxes were too high and infrastructure costs scared away investors. I was still serving on the County Land Commission at the time when we started building the Recreational Shoreline Incentive Program. Reduced tax structures, protected development corridors, environmental zoning agreements. We created a system that encouraged controlled lakefront growth without destroying public access or bankrupting local families who already own land there. The entire reason Willow Ridge Lake Estates existed was because those agreements made luxury development profitable, and every single one required county shoreline approval signed directly through my office. Patricia just never bothered learning whose signature sat on the bottom of those documents. The older deputy finally cleared his throat awkwardly again. Sir, if you have ownership records available, this situation can probably be resolved peacefully. Peacefully. I almost smiled at that. I opened the driver door of my truck slowly and reached behind the seat where an old leather portfolio sat beneath a faded county roads map. The leather smelled like dust and lake air when I pulled it open. Inside sat property deeds, shoreline permits, county easement agreements, and tax records older than Patricia's real estate career. Her confidence faded slightly the moment she saw the official county seals stamped across the paperwork. Tiny details matter in situations like this. Embossed signatures, historic parcel maps, government records printed long before luxury HOAs started acting like miniature kingdoms. Patricia recovered quickly, though. People like her always do. Those records still require modern compliance review, she said sharply. Your cabin does not meet updated architectural standards adopted by the association. I looked directly at her. The association exists on county-protected shoreline land approved under grandfathered historical structures. The younger deputy blinked immediately. He recognized legal language when he heard it. Patricia did not. She just tightened her jaw harder. That does not exempt you from HOA governance. Oh, there it was. The sentence that exposed the whole problem. Patricia honestly believed the HOA governed the shoreline itself. She thought expensive homes and annual dues somehow outranked county land authority. Around us, more neighbors stepped onto balconies holding coffee mugs while pretending not to watch. Rich neighborhoods love drama almost as much as they love pretending they are above it. The lake breeze carried the smell of pine trees and wetwood across the dock, while sunlight slowly burned through the remaining fog. I studied the fresh lock hanging from my cabin door one more time before turning back toward the deputies. Did either of you verify who owns the shoreline trust easement under this property before responding today? Silence. The older deputy shifted uncomfortably. Patricia answered instead. The HOA legal team handled all ownership verification. Legal team. Another performance phrase. I had sat through enough county hearings to recognize bluffing when I heard it. Real attorneys do not send sheriff deputies to seize grandfathered lake property before sunrise over aesthetic complaints. Then I noticed something else taped beneath the seizure notice on my porch. A proposed HOA dues increase notice scheduled for next month's board meeting. Funny timing. Patricia wanted more money from residents while simultaneously trying to erase one of the original shoreline properties standing between her neighborhood and complete visual uniformity. She thought removing my cabin would increase surrounding home values. What she did not understand was that the moment she weaponized county law against me personally, she handed me legal grounds to revisit every shoreline tax incentive protecting her entire subdivision from massive assessment increases. And standing there beside the quiet lake while morning sunlight reflected across water my family had lived beside for 50 years, I decided Patricia Holloway was about to learn exactly how expensive arrogance can become when it collides with the man who wrote the county shoreline agreements in the first place. Patricia Holloway smiled the way rich people do when they think paperwork automatically makes them smarter than everyone else. She kept one manicured hand resting on her clipboard while lake wind pushed loose strands of blonde hair across her sunglasses. Behind her, Willow Ridge Lake Estates gleamed in the morning sunlight like a luxury brochure come to life. Perfect stone walkways, freshly trimmed hedges, million-dollar homes stacked along the shoreline with giant windows facing the water like trophies. Everything looked polished, controlled, expensive. Patricia spent years making sure of that. The problem was she confused expensive with powerful. I leaned against my truck quietly while the deputies stood awkwardly between us, pretending not to notice the tension building around the cabin. More neighbors had gathered outside by then. People love pretending they are just out for a morning walk when suburban drama starts unfolding beside lakefront property. I recognized several residents watching from nearby docks holding coffee mugs and phones low near their sides, hoping to catch something interesting. Patricia noticed them too. That was exactly why she kept talking loudly. The association has attempted reasonable compliance enforcement for over 18 months, she announced like she was giving testimony in court. Mr. Whitaker repeatedly ignored architectural modernization requests. Architectural modernization requests. That was Patricia's favorite phrase for anything she personally disliked. She once tried forcing a retired couple to repaint their boathouse because the cedar stain looked too rustic beside neighboring homes. Another resident received 3 violation notices over an antique fishing sign hanging near his dock. Patricia believed the lake existed to impress people with money. Folks like me saw it differently. To us, the lake mattered because it stayed honest. Water does not care about social status. It only reflects whatever stands in front of it. I looked toward my cabin again while sunlight warmed the old cedar walls. The place was simple. 1 bedroom, stone fireplace, tin roof patched twice after spring storms. My father added the screened porch in 1981 after a tornado ripped through the western shoreline. You could still smell pine resin in the wood when summer heat hit the walls just right. Patricia saw visual deterioration. I saw family history nailed together board by board. The younger deputy stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. Sir, maybe we should continue this through the county records office instead of out here. Smart kid. He was finally realizing this situation felt wrong. Patricia immediately cut him off. The HOA has full authority over all residential shoreline compliance matters inside Willow Ridge Estates. I almost corrected her right there. Almost. But hidden authority only works when arrogance keeps talking long enough to expose itself fully. So instead, I let her continue digging the hole deeper. The board approved immediate seizure action due to repeated noncompliance and unresolved ownership concerns, she added sharply. Ownership concerns. That phrase caught the older deputy's attention too. His eyes shifted toward my leather portfolio still open inside the truck. He had seen the county seals already. Real ones. Not HOA stationery pretending to sound official. A slow breeze rolled across the lake, carrying the smell of wet dock wood and gasoline from somebody starting an old fishing boat farther downshore. The sound brought back memories instantly. Eleanor sitting beside me on the dock at sunrise, wrapped in a faded University of Tennessee sweatshirt, while we drank burnt coffee from metal thermoses during our last summer together. After she got sick, the cabin became our escape from hospitals and fluorescent lights and whispered conversations doctors thought we could not hear. Patricia did not know any of that. People obsessed with appearances rarely ask about history. They only care whether something matches the neighborhood brochure. She stepped toward the porch and pointed dramatically at the cabin windows. This structure negatively impacts premium shoreline valuation across the western sector. There it was. The real issue. Not compliance. Not safety. Not ownership. Property values. Patricia wanted the old cabin gone because wealthy buyers touring Willow Ridge expected luxury aesthetics from every angle of the lake. My place reminded people the shoreline existed long before gated communities and HOA newsletters. I noticed one of the nearby homeowners quietly lowering his coffee mug while listening more carefully now. People start paying attention once they hear money involved. Interesting, I said calmly, especially considering this property predates every home in your subdivision. Patricia folded her arms immediately. Historical age does not exempt properties from modernization standards. Actually, I answered quietly, county shoreline preservation agreements sometimes do. Silence. Tiny pause again. That same flicker of uncertainty crossed the younger deputy's face, while Patricia's jaw tightened harder beneath expensive makeup. She still did not fully understand what she was standing on. Literally. The entire western shoreline section of Willow Ridge operated under grandfathered recreational zoning agreements tied to historic land preservation covenants. My cabin was not the legal problem here. It was the legal anchor protecting surrounding luxury development from far stricter environmental taxation and shoreline restrictions. Remove the protected historical property status attached to my parcel, and the county could reevaluate the entire western shoreline district. Increased tax exposure. Dock reassessments, environmental compliance reviews, massive HOA fee adjustments. Patricia thought she was removing an inconvenience. In reality, she was threatening the legal foundation keeping her wealthy neighborhood financially comfortable. The older deputy finally spoke again, slower this time. Mr. Whitaker, are you saying this property has county preservation designation? I looked directly at him. I am saying the county land office probably should have been contacted before anybody changed locks on a protected shoreline parcel. Patricia's confidence cracked for real then. Small but visible. The kind of crack only experienced people notice immediately. She pushed her sunglasses higher and forced another smile. The HOA legal team reviewed all applicable documentation. Bluff. Pure bluff. Because if any real county attorney had reviewed the parcel history attached to my cabin, nobody would have shown up with deputies before sunrise holding seizure notices printed on HOA letterhead. Then my phone buzzed inside my jacket pocket. I checked the screen and almost smiled. Judge Harold Bennett, retired county circuit judge, longtime Shoreline Commission advisor, one of the few people in the county who knew exactly how dangerous Patricia's little stunt had just become. And standing there beside the quiet lake, while Patricia Holloway kept pretending authority she did not actually possess, I answered the call knowing the next few hours were about to become very expensive for the Willow Ridge HOA. Judge Harold Bennett answered on the second ring with the same calm voice he used in county courtrooms for almost 30 years. "Morning, Mason," he said. Please tell me you are calling because somebody finally caught a record base out there. I looked toward Patricia standing beside my porch pretending confidence, while two sheriff deputies waited awkwardly between us. Not exactly, I answered quietly. The Willow Ridge HOA changed the locks on my cabin and brought deputies out for a seizure notice. Silence. Then one slow exhale through the phone. You are kidding. I wish I was. The lake breeze pushed fog across the dock while sunlight reflected off the water in bright silver flashes. Patricia kept watching me closely, probably trying to figure out why I suddenly looked less irritated and more patient. People like Patricia misunderstand patience. They think calm means weakness because they have never dealt with someone who knows exactly where the legal boundaries actually are. Judge Bennett lowered his voice immediately. Did they touch the shoreline parcel directly? Changed locks. Posted notices. Contractors on site sometime before dawn. Another silence. Longer this time. I could almost hear papers moving around on his desk through the phone. Mason, he finally said carefully, they cannot enforce seizure actions against a protected shoreline trust parcel without county review. I know. Do they know? I looked directly at Patricia. Not yet. The older deputy noticed the shift in my tone immediately. His shoulders tightened slightly, while Patricia kept clutching that clipboard like it was armor. She still thought this was an HOA dispute. She had no idea she was standing inside county shoreline preservation territory protected under agreements older than her entire subdivision. Judge Bennett spoke again. I want copies of every notice they posted. Every document. And do not let them remove anything from the property. Already handled. Good. Because if they altered a protected parcel without review authority, this becomes a county compliance issue very fast. Very fast. That part was true. County shoreline law works quietly until someone violates it publicly. Then everything moves at once. I ended the call and slid my phone back into my jacket while lake water knocked softly against the dock beneath us. Patricia finally stepped closer again. I assume that was your attorney, she said with forced confidence. No, I answered calmly. Retired county judge. That landed harder than I expected. Both deputies looked at each other instantly, while Patricia's smile tightened around the edges. Tiny details matter in moments like that. Retired judges do not get involved in ordinary HOA disputes before breakfast. The younger deputy finally asked the question he should have asked an hour earlier. Sir, exactly what kind of property designation does this cabin have? I walked toward the porch slowly while the old cedar boards creaked beneath my boots. Morning sun warmed the railing Eleanor painted years ago after insisting the cabin looked too serious for summer. I could still remember the smell of fresh paint mixing with lake air while she laughed at how badly I handled a paintbrush. Funny what stays with you. I reached beside the door frame and pulled down a small metal plate mounted near the porch light. Most people never noticed it because weather had faded the lettering over the years. County Historical Shoreline Preservation Parcel. Patricia's expression changed immediately the moment the deputies read it. Not panic yet. Confusion first. Then calculation. That designation does not override community standards, she said quickly. Bluffing again. The older deputy frowned toward the plate. Actually, ma'am, county preservation parcels usually fall under separate review procedures. Patricia ignored him completely. The association still maintains architectural enforcement rights within Willow Ridge Estates. I nodded slowly. For homes under HOA-owned shoreline agreements. Another pause. Wind rustled through pine trees behind the cabin, while somewhere farther down the lake somebody started a pontoon boat engine. Normal lake sounds. Calm sounds. Meanwhile, Patricia Holloway's little empire was beginning to crack open in complete silence. The younger deputy stepped toward me carefully. Sir, are you saying this parcel is not fully governed by the HOA? I am saying the HOA exists because the county approved limited luxury development around protected shoreline properties like this one. Both deputies went quiet after that. Patricia did not. She doubled down instead. People built on ego usually do when fear starts creeping in. Regardless, she snapped, the association board has documented visual deterioration, dock irregularities, and unresolved compliance concerns. There it was again. Visual deterioration. The phrase sounded even dumber standing beside a peaceful cedar cabin with sunlight dancing across the water behind it. Meanwhile, 3 giant mansions farther downshore technically violated environmental setback restrictions so badly the county could fine them 6 figures each if inspections ever reopened. But Patricia never cared about real compliance. Only appearances. I noticed several nearby homeowners still watching from balconies and docks, now openly listening instead of pretending not to. Rich neighborhoods survive on illusion. Once people sense authority may be fake, curiosity spreads quickly. Then Patricia made the mistake that truly doomed her. She pointed toward my dock and said loudly, "This structure lowers surrounding property values across the Western Shoreline District." I almost smiled, because those exact words mattered legally. A lot. The Western Shoreline District operated under county recreational tax incentives specifically tied to preserving mixed historical shoreline use. Luxury development received lower tax exposure because the district remained legally balanced between historical parcels and modern construction. Remove protected historical properties from the shoreline equation, and the county could reevaluate every luxury assessment rate in Willow Ridge, which meant HOA dues would explode overnight. Patricia thought my cabin hurt property values. In reality, my cabin was one of the only things keeping half the neighborhood financially comfortable. The older deputy finally removed his hat and rubbed one hand across his forehead slowly. He understood now. Not everything yet, but enough. "Ma'am," he said carefully toward Patricia, "I really think county land records should review this before any further enforcement happens." Patricia opened her mouth immediately, probably preparing another speech about community standards and neighborhood image. But before she could speak, 2 black county SUVs turned onto the gravel road leading toward the cabin. County seal logos gleamed across the doors beneath the morning sun. And the second Patricia Holloway saw who stepped out of the lead vehicle, carrying a leather document case under one arm, the color drained from her face for the very first time that morning. Judge Harold Bennett stepped out of the county SUV wearing jeans, a faded windbreaker, and the same expression he used to wear before destroying somebody's argument in court without ever raising his voice. He carried a thick leather document case under one arm, while 2 county shoreline officers followed behind him, holding rolled survey maps and property files. The moment Patricia saw the county seals on their jackets, her confidence shifted from aggressive to cautious so fast it almost looked physical. The older deputy straightened immediately, while the younger one stepped back from my porch like he suddenly realized standing there might become a career problem. Morning sunlight had burned away most of the fog by then, leaving the lake bright and glassy beneath clear blue sky. Boat wakes rolled softly against the shoreline while gulls circled above the water. Everything about the morning felt peaceful except the expensive suburban panic slowly spreading across Patricia Holloway's face. Judge Bennett walked directly toward me first and shook my hand calmly. "Mason," he said quietly, "you keeping yourself entertained out here?" Apparently the HOA decided to help. That actually made him smile slightly before his eyes shifted toward the orange seizure notice still taped beside my front door. His expression flattened immediately after reading it. "Interesting choice," he muttered. Patricia stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Judge Bennett, this matter concerns internal HOA compliance enforcement regarding unresolved architectural and ownership disputes." There it was again, her performance voice. Calm, polished, carefully rehearsed. The problem was she was finally speaking to people who actually understood county shoreline law instead of intimidated homeowners at HOA meetings. Judge Bennett looked at her over reading glasses slowly. "Mrs. Holloway, did your association authorize contractors to alter access points on a protected shoreline parcel before county review?" Patricia hesitated for the first time all morning. Tiny pause. Just enough. The association acted within established governance authority. Another non-answer. Judges noticed those immediately. One of the shoreline officers stepped toward the porch and carefully examined the new lock installed on my cabin door. "This was replaced recently," he observed. "Probably before dawn," I answered. The officer nodded while writing notes onto a clipboard. Meanwhile, more residents had started gathering along neighboring docks, pretending to organize kayaks or sip coffee while openly watching the situation unfold. Rich lake communities survive on gossip almost as much as property values. Patricia noticed the audience growing too. You could see it bothering her. She was used to controlling the narrative inside Willow Ridge. But county officials showing up changed the entire balance instantly. Judge Bennett opened the leather case slowly and removed several thick property folders stamped with county archival seals. Old paper carried that familiar dry courthouse smell when he spread the documents across the hood of my truck. "Let us clarify a few things," he said calmly. The shoreline officers unrolled a large survey map showing the western district surrounding my cabin. Colored zoning lines stretched across the lakefront like veins. Historical preservation corridors. Recreational shoreline easements. Environmental setback zones. Patricia stared at the paperwork while the younger deputy leaned closer, trying to understand what he was looking at. Judge Bennett tapped one highlighted section directly beneath my property. "This parcel belongs to the Whitaker Historical Shoreline Preservation Trust established under county ordinance 17 years ago." Patricia folded her arms immediately. "The HOA still maintains neighborhood compliance jurisdiction." Judge Bennett nodded slightly. "Over association-owned development parcels." Then he tapped the surrounding shoreline again. "Not over protected trust land predating the subdivision itself." Silence. Real silence this time. Even nearby neighbors stopped pretending not to listen. The lake breeze moved softly through pine branches overhead, while dock ropes knocked gently against wood below. Tiny peaceful sounds surrounding a legal disaster nobody saw coming except me. Patricia recovered quickly again, though. She always did. The association board believed the property violated modernization standards, negatively affecting surrounding home valuations. Judge Bennett actually sighed at that. "Mrs. Holloway, do you understand why the Western Shoreline District receives reduced luxury tax assessment rates?" Patricia blinked once behind her sunglasses. There it was. She did not know. She had spent years acting like Queen of the Lake, while never learning the legal structure holding the entire community together. Judge Bennett continued calmly. "The county approved controlled luxury shoreline development only because protected historical parcels like this cabin preserved mixed-use designation status across the district." The younger deputy frowned immediately. "Meaning what exactly?" One of the shoreline officers answered him. "Meaning properties around this cabin qualify for lower taxation because the district legally remains classified as balanced recreational shoreline instead of exclusive luxury waterfront." I watched the realization hit Patricia in slow motion. Not fully yet, but enough for fear to finally appear beneath the confidence. Judge Bennett pointed toward the surrounding mansions lining the lake. "Without these protected historical designations, reassessment rates across the Western District would increase substantially." The older deputy looked stunned now. "How substantial?" Judge Bennett closed the folder carefully. "Potentially triple current shoreline HOA operating costs after county reassessment." That landed like a thunderclap in complete silence. Even neighboring residents watching from balconies reacted visibly. Coffee mugs lowered. Faces tightened. Somebody whispered something sharp from a nearby dock. Patricia's mouth opened slightly before closing again. For the first time all morning, she had no prepared speech ready. Because suddenly this was no longer about one old fishing cabin hurting neighborhood aesthetics. This was about the financial foundation supporting every luxury property surrounding the lake. And standing there beside my porch with sunlight reflecting off calm water behind him, Judge Bennett delivered the final blow quietly enough that only the people closest heard it clearly. "Mrs. Holloway, if your association unlawfully interfered with a protected shoreline parcel, the county may be required to review every tax incentive agreement currently benefiting Willow Ridge Lake Estates." The younger deputy slowly removed his hat after hearing that. Patricia's sunglasses could not hide the panic anymore. Around us, the peaceful lake kept moving exactly the same as always while wealthy homeowners quietly realized the woman enforcing mailbox colors and dock paint standards might have just triggered the most expensive HOA mistake in county history. The atmosphere around the lake changed completely after Judge Bennett explained what protected shoreline status actually meant. You could feel it spreading through the crowd in real time, like cold air moving across water before a storm. The homeowners watching from nearby docks were no longer curious spectators enjoying HOA drama over morning coffee. Now they looked nervous, very nervous, because wealthy people can tolerate embarrassment. What they cannot tolerate is hearing the words tax reassessment attached to properties they paid millions to protect. Patricia Holloway realized it too. Her posture changed first. Arms folded tighter. Smile gone completely. Clipboard pressed against her chest, like it might somehow stop the legal collapse starting around her. The lake breeze carried the smell of cedarwood and boat fuel while gulls drifted overhead, completely unaware that half the luxury neighborhood was mentally calculating how much triple HOA fees might actually cost. Judge Bennett calmly handed copies of the shoreline maps to both sheriff deputies while one of the county officers photographed the seizure notice still taped beside my cabin door. Every click of that camera sounded louder than it should have in the quiet morning air. Documentation. That is how quiet people destroy fake authority. No screaming. No threats. Just records. Patricia finally tried changing tactics. There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding parcel classifications, she said carefully. Ah yes, the retreat language. People start saying misunderstanding the moment they realize confidence alone will not save them anymore. Judge Bennett barely looked up from the paperwork. A misunderstanding does not usually involve replacing locks on protected county shoreline property before sunrise. The younger deputy actually coughed, trying not to laugh at that. Patricia noticed immediately, and her face tightened even harder beneath expensive makeup. I stayed quiet beside the truck watching everything unfold while sunlight reflected across the water behind us. That was the important part. People like Patricia expect emotional reactions. They prepare for yelling, anger, defensiveness. Calm makes them uncomfortable because calm usually means somebody knows more than they do. One of the county shoreline officers stepped carefully toward my dock, holding an old parcel survey against the light. Judge, you need to see this. Bennett walked over while the rest of us followed slowly across the weathered boards. The dock creaked beneath our feet the same way it had since the 1980s. Eleanor always said the sound reminded her of old porch swings during summer storms. The officer pointed toward a series of steel shoreline markers partially hidden near the waterline beneath years of moss and faded paint. County preservation boundary markers. Original ones. Older than the subdivision itself. Bennett studied them for several seconds before turning toward Patricia. Your association expanded Western shoreline restrictions directly into protected county trust boundaries. Patricia blinked behind her sunglasses. The development plans were approved years ago. Approved conditionally, Bennett corrected calmly. Based on preservation coexistence agreements protecting historical shoreline access. Another dangerous phrase. Historical shoreline access. Because once county preservation law enters the conversation, every unauthorized HOA restriction suddenly becomes a liability instead of a rule. Nearby homeowners started moving closer now. Nobody even pretended not to listen anymore. One man in a golf pullover actually walked down from his balcony, carrying printed HOA fee statements in his hand. Judge Bennett, he called carefully. Are you saying our tax structure depends on cabins like this staying protected? Bennett looked toward him evenly. I am saying the Western District qualified for reduced luxury shoreline assessment specifically because mixed historical use remained legally preserved. The silence afterward felt heavy. You could practically hear people recalculating their mortgages in real time. Patricia stepped forward quickly before panic spread further. The board acted to preserve neighborhood standards and long-term property values. Wrong thing to say? Completely wrong. Because the moment she mentioned property values again, the homeowners stopped seeing her as a protector and started seeing her as a threat to their investments. Another resident spoke up immediately. Wait a second. Are you telling us the HOA almost triggered reassessment over aesthetic complaints? Nobody answered him directly. They did not need to. The truth was already sitting there in plain sight beside my cabin door with a fresh lock and an illegal seizure notice attached to it. The older deputy finally removed the orange notice from the porch carefully while the county officer documented the entire process with photographs. Patricia watched silently now. No speeches. No authority performance. Just controlled panic behind designer sunglasses. Then Judge Bennett delivered the real blow. Calmly. Quietly. The way experienced men always do. Mrs. Holloway, the county, will need immediate review of all Western Shoreline HOA enforcement actions issued during your presidency. Patricia's face lost color instantly, because she understood what that meant before anyone else did. Every dock fine, every architectural violation, every shoreline restriction, every enforcement action touching protected parcels could now become evidence in a county compliance investigation. The younger deputy looked toward me with a completely different expression than earlier that morning. Respect now. Maybe even sympathy. Funny how quickly power dynamics change once paperwork enters the room. I walked slowly onto the porch while the county officers removed the replacement lock from my cabin door. The old cedar smelled warm beneath the sunlight, while lake water rolled softly against the dock behind us. Home. Simple as that. Meanwhile, behind me, Patricia Holloway stood silently watching the suburban kingdom she spent years controlling begin collapsing because she never bothered learning who actually owned the shoreline beneath it. Then her phone started ringing, and judging by the panic on her face after seeing the caller ID, the HOA board had finally realized exactly how expensive this morning was about to become. By noon, the entire mood around Willow Ridge Lake Estates had shifted from curiosity to full suburban panic. Word spread across the neighborhood faster than wildfire once residents realized the county shoreline office was officially reviewing HOA authority over the Western District. Golf carts rolled slowly through the streets, carrying nervous homeowners holding printed tax records and HOA statements, like people preparing for financial weather reports. You could feel the anxiety hanging over the lake heavier than the summer humidity. Patio conversations stopped the moment county vehicles passed by. Even the usual sounds of landscaping crews and leaf blowers had disappeared. Nothing makes wealthy neighborhoods quieter than the possibility of rising taxes. I sat on the porch of my cabin with a fresh cup of coffee while county shoreline officers continued documenting boundary markers along the waterline. The smell of cedar, sunscreen, and lake water drifted through the warm afternoon air while sunlight shimmered across boat wakes moving through the cove. From a distance, the lake still looked peaceful. Up close, Willow Ridge was unraveling one whispered conversation at a time. Patricia Holloway had disappeared for nearly 2 hours after her phone started ringing earlier that morning. But eventually she returned driving far too fast down the gravel shoreline road in her white Range Rover with 2 additional HOA board members following behind her in separate SUVs. That alone told me everything. Emergency meeting energy. The kind that happens when people realize their fake authority just collided with actual county law. She stepped out wearing the same cream blazer, but now wrinkles showed around the sleeves, and her hair no longer looked perfectly arranged. Stress had finally started winning. One of the board members, a thin man named Richard Bellamy who sold luxury insurance policies around the lake, kept wiping sweat from his forehead despite the breeze coming off the water. They walked toward the cabin together while nearby residents openly watched from docks and balconies now. Nobody even pretended to mind their own business anymore. Patricia stopped several feet from my porch. The board would like to resolve this matter cooperatively, she announced carefully. Ah yes, cooperative. Funny how quickly people discover cooperation once county investigators arrive. Judge Bennett remained near the shoreline officers reviewing parcel maps while pretending not to listen. He was very good at that. Patricia glanced toward him nervously before continuing. The association was unaware of the historical preservation complications attached to your parcel. Complications. Another retreat word. I leaned back in the old porch chair Eleanor bought from an antique store years ago and watched lake water sparkle through the dock rails. You seemed very certain about seizure authority this morning. Richard Bellamy stepped forward quickly before Patricia could answer. Mr. Whitaker, nobody intended escalation. I almost smiled. Nobody intended escalation except the people who arrived before sunrise with deputies, replacement locks, and seizure notices. But panic changes tone fast once legal consequences appear. One of the county shoreline officers approached carrying additional files while Judge Bennett walked slowly back toward the porch. Mason, he said calmly, you should probably hear this. He handed me a thin folder marked Western District Compliance Review. Inside sat copies of HOA shoreline enforcement notices issued over the past 4 years. Dock penalties, structural citations, unauthorized modernization demands. Most targeted properties near protected shoreline boundaries. Patricia noticed me reading and immediately tried explaining. The board acted based on legal recommendations regarding neighborhood consistency. Judge Bennett looked directly at her. Mrs. Holloway, several of these enforcement actions appear to exceed the jurisdiction limits established under the original shoreline coexistence agreements. Silence again. The dangerous kind. Richard Bellamy's face visibly paled while the second board member quietly stepped backward toward the SUVs like she suddenly regretted participating in any of this. Then Judge Bennett opened another folder. There is also the matter of unauthorized dock expansions approved by the HOA inside protected setback zones. Patricia's jaw tightened instantly. Those projects increased community value. They also violated county shoreline preservation restrictions, Bennett answered calmly. Nearby homeowners started moving closer again once they heard the words dock violations. That hit differently around lake communities because everybody understands docks equal money. Big money. One resident farther downshore actually shouted from his balcony, "Are you saying the county can remove docks?" Bennett answered without raising his voice. "I am saying non-compliant shoreline construction can trigger reassessment and enforcement review." Panic spread immediately after that. You could almost hear it moving through the neighborhood. Patio doors opening. Phone calls starting. People searching old permits and dock records. Patricia realized the crowd was turning fast and tried regaining control one more time. The HOA board has always acted in the best interests of property owners. Wrong sentence again. Because the second she said property owners, several nearby residents started talking over her. "You told us the county fully approved all shoreline regulations. You said compliance enforcement protected our investments. You never mentioned historical tax dependencies." Every question chipped another layer off her authority. I stayed quiet through all of it. Calm matters in moments like that. Calm forces other people to fill silence with truth. The lake breeze rattled wind chimes hanging near the porch while afternoon sunlight reflected off expensive homes suddenly looking much less confident than they had that morning. Then Richard Bellamy quietly asked the question nobody else wanted to say out loud. "Judge Bennett, if the county reevaluates the Western District, how much could dues actually increase?" Bennett looked toward the shoreline calmly before answering. "Potentially enough that many current shoreline incentives disappear permanently." That landed harder than anything else all day. Nearby residents actually stopped speaking completely after hearing it. Because suddenly this was no longer abstract legal language. It was mortgages, insurance, property taxes, luxury lifestyles balanced on county agreements Patricia Holloway never bothered understanding before, trying to erase the wrong cabin from the shoreline. Then Judge Bennett closed the final folder slowly and looked directly at Patricia. "The county has scheduled an emergency shoreline review hearing tomorrow evening at the Willow Ridge Clubhouse." Patricia's face lost what little confidence remained. Because she finally understood something important. Tomorrow night, the entire neighborhood was going to learn exactly who really controlled the shoreline beneath their homes. By the next evening, the Willow Ridge Clubhouse looked less like a luxury community center and more like a courthouse waiting for a verdict. Every parking spot around the lakefront building was full an hour before the emergency shoreline hearing even started. Range Rovers, lifted trucks, golf carts, luxury sedans, all packed together beneath glowing streetlights while nervous homeowners gathered outside in small groups whispering over printed tax estimates and county notices. The air smelled like lake water, expensive cologne, and pure financial anxiety. Inside, the clubhouse ballroom buzzed with low conversations echoing off polished wood walls and oversized chandeliers. Usually the room hosted wine tastings and charity dinners. Tonight it held nearly every resident from the Western Shoreline District staring at county officials like people waiting for weather reports before a hurricane. I arrived quietly through the side entrance wearing jeans, boots, and the same brown jacket I always wore at the cabin. No speeches, no entourage, just paperwork inside a leather folder under my arm. Funny thing about real authority. It usually enters rooms without needing attention first. Patricia Holloway stood near the front beside the HOA board table wearing another perfectly tailored cream blazer, but the performance looked weaker tonight. Her smile felt forced, her shoulders tighter. Every few minutes another resident approached her demanding answers she clearly no longer had. Meanwhile, county shoreline officers lined the walls beside Judge Bennett reviewing thick stacks of documents beneath bright overhead lights. The sound of papers turning mixed with nervous whispers and the soft clink of melting ice inside untouched water glasses. Nobody came tonight for socializing. They came for survival. I noticed the younger deputy from yesterday, standing near the entrance looking deeply uncomfortable while residents stared at him every time the word seizure notice got mentioned. Poor guy probably regretted agreeing to that sunrise visit more every hour. Judge Bennett finally stepped to the front around 7 o'clock sharp, and the room went silent almost instantly. Years in courtrooms teach people how to command silence without effort. This hearing concerns county review of Western Shoreline Compliance Enforcement and Preservation Agreements affecting Willow Ridge Lake Estates, he announced calmly. Nobody even shifted in their seats. The entire room felt tense enough to crack. Patricia stood quickly before questions could start. The HOA board has always acted in the best interests of maintaining community standards and protecting property values. There it was again. Property values. The phrase landed differently tonight, though. Residents no longer heard reassurance. They heard risk. Judge Bennett nodded slightly before motioning toward one of the county shoreline officers who activated a large projector screen beside the stage. Parcel maps appeared across the wall showing shoreline boundaries glowing in red, blue, and yellow layers. Historical preservation parcels. Recreational tax incentive zones. Protected coexistence corridors. The entire Western District looked like a complicated web of legal agreements nobody in the room except me and the county officials had ever fully understood. Then the officer highlighted my cabin property directly in the center of the map. The Whitaker Preservation Parcel, he explained, functions as a foundational historical designation supporting reduced luxury shoreline assessment across this district. You could actually hear people inhale sharply after that. The officer continued calmly. Removal or unlawful interference with protected parcels may trigger mandatory reassessment under county ordinance. Murmurs exploded immediately through the ballroom. People pulled out calculators on phones. Others started flipping through HOA fee statements like they were suddenly written in another language. Patricia stepped forward quickly. The board never intended to interfere with county tax structures. Judge Bennett looked directly at her. Yet your association issued seizure actions against one of the primary preservation parcels supporting those structures. Silence again. Heavy silence. The kind that settles when denial finally runs out of room. One resident near the front stood up, holding a stack of papers and shaking hands. Are you telling us our HOA dues could increase because of this? The county tax assessor sitting beside Bennett answered honestly. Potentially significantly. Panic spread instantly after that. Voices rose across the ballroom, while homeowners started arguing openly now. Somebody shouted that they moved to Willow Ridge, specifically because of favorable shoreline taxes. Another resident demanded to know why the HOA board never disclosed how dependent the neighborhood was on historical preservation agreements. Patricia tried speaking over the crowd, but nobody listened anymore. Because the illusion had broken completely. The luxury neighborhood they thought operated under HOA authority was actually balanced on county agreements created long before most of them bought homes there. Then Judge Bennett raised one hand, and the room slowly quieted again. There is another issue, he said calmly. A county shoreline officer handed him additional documents. The review uncovered unauthorized dock expansions and shoreline modifications approved by the HOA board inside protected setback zones. The projector screen changed immediately. Photographs appeared showing massive luxury docks extending beyond legal boundaries. Stone retaining walls violating preservation restrictions. Unauthorized landscaping projects inside county-controlled shoreline buffers. And stamped across multiple approval forms, near the bottom sat Patricia Holloway's signature. The room exploded again. But this time the anger turned directly toward the HOA board. You told us these projects were approved. You said permits were finalized. Do you realize what happens if the county revokes these incentives? Patricia's face lost nearly all color beneath the chandelier lights while board members beside her avoided eye contact entirely. One older homeowner near the back finally shouted the question everyone was thinking. How much are dues going up? That was when Judge Bennett looked toward me quietly. No dramatic reveal. No spotlight moment. Just calm acknowledgement. I stood slowly from my chair holding the original shoreline agreement folder under one arm while the ballroom fell silent again. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me now very differently than they had yesterday morning beside the cabin. Not as the old man with the rustic fishing dock. As the man connected to every county shoreline agreement, keeping their luxury lakefront lifestyles affordable. I walked toward the front calmly while lake water reflected. Moonlight through the clubhouse windows behind me. Then I opened the folder and placed the original Western District Preservation Agreements directly on the table in front of Patricia Holloway. And for the first time since this entire mess started, the Queen of Willow Ridge looked genuinely afraid. The ballroom stayed completely silent after I placed the original shoreline agreements in front of Patricia Holloway. Not nervous silence anymore either. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over a room when everybody suddenly realizes the wrong person held power the entire time. Chandeliers glowed softly above rows of wealthy homeowners staring between me, the county officials, and the thick folder sitting directly in front of the woman who spent years acting like Queen of Willow Ridge Lake Estates. Outside the clubhouse windows, moonlight shimmered across the lake in slow silver waves while dock lights reflected against calm water. Funny thing about lakes. They stay peaceful even while people panic beside them. Patricia looked down at the agreements like they were written in another language. In a way, they probably were to her. Real county law rarely sounds polished or glamorous. It sounds precise, permanent, dangerous to people who ignore details. Judge Bennett folded his hands calmly beside the projector screen while the county tax assessor reviewed final reassessment estimates. Nobody rushed now. Once real authority enters a room, panic slows into consequences. Patricia finally looked up toward me with the first honest expression I had seen from her since this started. Fear. You knew this entire time, she said quietly. I nodded once. I knew the county agreements. She swallowed hard before speaking again. Why did you never say anything? That almost made me laugh. People like Patricia always ask that question after they lose control. Why did you not tell me? Because they cannot imagine a world where someone powerful chooses not to advertise it constantly. I looked toward the lake through the clubhouse windows before answering. Because I came to the cabin for peace, not politics. The room stayed quiet after that. Even the angry residents stopped, interrupting. They were listening differently now. One of the county officers handed Judge Bennett the final shoreline review summary, while papers shuffled softly across the front tables. The sound reminded me of courthouse mornings years ago before difficult rulings. Calm paperwork deciding expensive futures. Bennett adjusted his glasses and addressed the room evenly. Effective immediately, the county is suspending all pending HOA shoreline enforcement actions within the Western Preservation District, pending full legal review. Murmurs spread quickly across the ballroom. Then came the real blow. Additionally, unauthorized expansion approvals issued under the current HOA board may trigger reassessment of recreational tax incentives tied to the western shoreline. Somebody near the back whispered a curse loud enough for half the room to hear. Another homeowner dropped into a chair, rubbing both hands across his face slowly. Patricia stood frozen beside the board table while the other HOA members looked ready to disappear through the walls. Then the county tax assessor delivered the number everyone feared most. Preliminary reassessment projections indicate potential HOA operating increases between 280 and 340% if preservation agreements are invalidated. The ballroom erupted instantly. Not confusion this time. Rage. Pure financial rage. Residents started standing up all at once, demanding explanations from the HOA board, while phones came out recording everything. You told us the shoreline was fully controlled by the association. You approved illegal dock projects. You almost destroyed the tax structure protecting this entire district. Every accusation slammed into Patricia harder than the last one. But she had nothing left now. No speeches. No polished authority voice. Just silence while the empire she built around aesthetic control collapsed publicly beneath chandelier light. I stayed near the front quietly while chaos moved around the room. That was the important part. Justice feels different when you do not need revenge speeches to win. The lake breeze rattled the clubhouse windows softly while somewhere outside a boat horn echoed across the dark water. Calm sounds. Honest sounds. Eventually Judge Bennett raised one hand, and the ballroom slowly quieted again. The county will recommend immediate dissolution review of the current HOA leadership structure pending compliance investigation. Patricia closed her eyes briefly after hearing that. Finished. Completely finished. The woman who once fined people over fishing boat covers and porch decorations now stood facing the loss of everything she controlled because she tried seizing the wrong lakeside cabin. One older homeowner near the front finally turned toward me directly. Mr. Whitaker, he asked carefully, is there any way to prevent the reassessment? The entire room looked toward me then. Hundreds of eyes. Nervous. Exhausted. Waiting. Funny reversal from 24 hours earlier when sheriff deputies told me to step away from my own porch. I looked around the ballroom slowly before answering. The preservation agreements can remain intact if the county determines protected shoreline coexistence was not intentionally violated beyond recovery. Hope spread through the room immediately after that. Then I added the important part. But the county would require complete compliance restructuring and new HOA oversight. Translation mattered. The residents understood it instantly. Patricia Holloway's era was over. Completely. Final. The meeting ended nearly an hour later beneath low conversations and shaken expressions while county officials collected documents from the HOA board for formal review. Nobody crowded around Patricia on the way out. Nobody defended her. The same residents who once treated her like suburban royalty walked past silently, avoiding eye contact. Power disappears fast once money starts bleeding. 3 weeks later, the Willow Ridge HOA board formally dissolved under county supervision. Shoreline Compliance Authority transferred temporarily to a restructuring committee overseen by county preservation officers. Illegal dock expansions were revised. Tax incentives stayed protected. HOA dues still increased, though nowhere near the disaster projections residents feared. Just enough to remind everyone how close they came to financial collapse because one woman cared more about appearances than law. As for my cabin, the original locks went back on 2 days after the hearing. I spent the first quiet Saturday afterward sitting on the dock before sunrise holding a fishing rod while mist rolled slowly across the lake again. Same cedar smell. Same soft water against the posts. Same peaceful silence Eleanor always loved. Across the shoreline, Willow Ridge looked different now. Less arrogant somehow. More careful. Nobody complained about my cabin anymore. In fact, a few neighbors even waved politely from their docks these days. Funny what happens once people learn who actually owns the ground beneath their luxury view. And sitting there watching morning sunlight spread across the water my family protected long before the mansions arrived, I realized something simple. The lake never cared about power. Only people did.